There are many ways to use reverb in your productions, but in this video, I'm gonna share with you several really cool tricks that you can take and use in your next production right now. Let's do it. The cool thing is that you can use every single one of these techniques in the same song. They're unique, and in many cases, they can work together, so you're gonna wanna watch till the end to get maximum value. The very first one is this. Make sure you're using reverbs on a bus. Not only is this more efficient, but you're gonna have way more control over the effect. Now, I have a whole video explaining buses you can check out if you're unfamiliar, but wait till the end of this video. I'll link that in the description. Now, this is really important because several of the other techniques I'm gonna share with you require that you do this. Let me show you. So every DAW is gonna be a little bit different, but in Logic, what you're gonna do is this. Pick the track that you wanna work with, and down here on Sends, go ahead and open that up, create a bus. Let's just go ahead and pick bus 10. It doesn't really matter which bus you actually use, it's a little arbitrary. What we're gonna do is send 100% of this signal to that bus. We're just gonna crank that up all the way to 0 dB, or a fancy little trick you can do is just do Option click. And then from here, we can actually add the reverb that we wanna use directly onto this bus. We're gonna go ahead and use Realm, which is one of my favorites. We're gonna set the mix to 100% on this, and then we're gonna change the decay to whatever we want. And then what we wanna do is we can now blend in the reverb using the fader instead of actually using the plugin itself. Now, if you listen to the vocal here, just as this, it's gonna be way too loud.
I changed my mind.
And that's because the fader right here is set to 0. So now we can adjust the actual volume of this reverb simply by adjusting the fader.
I changed my mind to
Just like that. Now, the cool thing is that this is not just useful for reverbs. You can use this for delays, you can put distortion. This is how you actually do parallel compression. There are so many different reasons that you would actually want to use buses, but that right there is the very first tip and technique and trick that you wanna make sure you're using, and that is to put your reverbs on an actual bus because you're gonna have way more control over it, which I'm gonna show you right now. That brings us to number 2. When you have a reverb on an effects bus, you can actually sidechain that reverb to whatever is running to it. Now, here's what I mean. So in this case, we have this vocal running to this reverb. So we have the reverb on the bus here. So what we can actually do is add a compressor after the reverb, and then we can actually sidechain this compressor to the vocal so that when the vocal starts going through, when she's singing, it actually pushes the reverb down and compresses that reverb down. So this is gonna actually help get that reverb out of the way of the vocal. So what we're gonna do is just go ahead and pull up this compressor right here, and we're gonna go to the top here, sidechain. We're gonna go to audio. We're gonna be looking for the lead verse Vox, which will be right down here. So now what's gonna happen is when we play this, you'll notice that the needle is gonna move whenever the vocal happens.
I changed my mind.
So this reverb is actually being compressed once that vocal signal actually hits. So we can go in here and start adjusting the threshold. We can adjust the ratio. So I'm gonna go with the 4:1 ratio, and we're gonna go ahead and start adjusting the actual threshold. So we're getting the amount of compression that we want.
I changed my mind to realign.
So you'll notice now that when she's singing, it is actually pushing that reverb down to get the reverb out of the way. One of the big mistakes that home studio producers make is that when they put a reverb on something and you have this vocal going through, the reverb is gonna start getting in the way of the vocal. So what this does is actually helps the vocal push the reverb down so that when the vocal stops or pauses, there's a little bit of a break, the compressor lets up and eases off of it, which then allows that reverb to come out a little bit more. So if you really listen here, I'm gonna set it so that it's compressing pretty aggressively. And the other thing I do is I turn auto gain off. All right, so let's go ahead and play this, and let's just really pay attention to the reverb. I'm gonna actually turn the reverb up so we can hear this a little bit easier.
I changed my mind to realign.
So you can really hear it when she sings realign. After she finishes this phrase, which is right in here, you can hear that reverb poke out a little bit more. Let's listen to that again.
Realign. You think you.
And even when I pause it, you can hear the reverb kind of pump back up. So what you can then do is actually turn auto release and auto attack off. You're gonna have a little bit more control over how the compressor interacts. And if you need help learning how compressors actually work, I have a whole video explaining how compressors work. And it's all the same whether you're using it on a reverb like this or if you're actually using it on a lead vocal. So that's trick number 2. Make sure that you're actually using a compressor after your reverb to sidechain that reverb to push it out of the way. Number 3, you can actually process effects with other effects. So basically with reverb, you can actually manipulate just that reverb and nothing else when it's on a bus. So I'm gonna show you 2 different examples, both of which are gonna be really exaggerated so you can understand what these are actually doing. The very first is I'm actually gonna add distortion onto just the reverb. Now listen to what this sounds like. I'm gonna go ahead and really exaggerate this like a lot to the point to where it's ridiculous. So we have on this bus right here, we have the reverb first. This reverb then is running into the distortion plugin. I'm using Decapitator, and I have this set at a pretty significant amount of drive. I'm gonna actually brighten this up. And this is again gonna make it so that we can really, really hear this.
I changed my mind to realign.
So you can really hear it, it's out of control right there. Now obviously we can blend this in, mix it into taste. So what I wanna do is solo out just the bus so you can only hear what the reverb sounds like. So this is the reverb with no distortion.
I changed my mind.
So that's just the reverb. We're not getting the main signal here. Now this is what it sounds like once we add that distortion.
I changed my mind to realign.
So obviously it sounds a lot more dirty, it sounds a lot more crunchy. Probably aren't gonna wanna go this hard. You could use distortion plugins on this, you could crank the highs on it, you could filter it out. So let's go ahead and filter it out, show you another really radical example. What we're gonna do is grab an EQ, just a simple channel EQ, and let's hypothetically say that this reverb is really bright, and it's over the top bright, and we need to really tame it down. So what we can do is go in here, and we can either use a filter or a shelf. I'm just gonna go ahead and use a filter to, again, make this really dramatic. And we're gonna filter out everything pretty much at about the 3K range. Now listen to this. Again, we're gonna solo out just the reverb.
I changed my mind
Without it.
to realign.
So you can hear, it makes that reverb sound way more dull. It sounds way more pushed back. I'm gonna give you a third option just for kicks and giggles. All right, so this third one, I'm gonna actually use Super VHS, which is a really unique plugin because you have this magic switch, which is gonna add a chorus effect to it. You can also add some heat, some watch, and some drift. We're just gonna kind of turn these all up just a little bit here, and you're gonna see what this does to the reverb. So let's again, just listen to this reverb. This is without Super VHS on.
I changed my mind.
And here's with it on.
I changed my mind to realign.
So this magic switch is actually adding a chorus effect, and we're getting a little bit of crunch, and then this drift and wash are kind of gonna give it a little bit of a lo-fi kind of sound. And so if we wanted to put this in the context of the entire mix, let's go ahead and take a look at how this would sound.
I changed my mind to realign. You think you stand a chance when you
Really, really cool. So all in all, the biggest thing you can do here is you can get really creative in how you can actually add processing simply to the reverb and nothing else, and this is gonna make it sound so much more distinct. That brings us to tip number 4. One of the most valuable techniques when using reverb that pros use is automating reverbs. And this is so much easier if you're using a bus like we're talking about. Let me show you how and why this is so useful. So we're actually gonna skip ahead to a little bit of a different part of this track, and that is this pre-chorus that's going into the chorus. Let's listen to it.
don't tell me that you really wanna stay when I'm the one that made all the change.
Yeah, I love this track so much. All right, so what we're gonna do here is a really creative decision, and that is to actually automate the reverb so that when we get to this line here,
Made all the change.
which is right before this huge hit, what I wanna do is suck the reverb out so we get a super, super dry vocal. And the way we're gonna do this is by automating this bus. All right, so here's how we're gonna actually do this. The very first thing is that we're gonna wanna make it so that our reverb aux, or the bus, actually populates within the arrangement window. The way we do that is by just simply turning on the read mode on automation. That's how it works in Logic. Obviously, every DAW is gonna be a little bit different. And then all we're gonna do is open up our automation. We're gonna go in here where I want to dry up this vocal, and we're gonna select the automation for volume, and we're gonna just turn it all the way down. And now what's gonna happen is we're gonna get reverb on this, and then as soon as we get to where this automation drops down, that reverb is just gonna disappear. And now it sounds like this.
Don't tell me that you really wanna stay
Hear that reverb?
when I'm the one that made all the change. Leave no trace.
Boom. So it's really kind of cool because this is a very extreme example of where we're automating it all the way down to really suck it in and dry it up, which is a very creative decision. But we can also automate it in such a way where this reverb is going to be essentially breathing. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and actually take a look at this. Right in here, we'll notice that we have all of this empty space happening. This is actually a really fantastic opportunity for us to maybe turn this reverb down when the vocal is happening, which is essentially similar to what we were talking about with the compression option, but in this case, we're just automating it this way.
Tell me that you really wanna stay
I'm gonna turn it down to where you can hear it, but it's not getting in the way of the vocal.
Don't tell me that you really wanna stay.
Like that. And then what I'm gonna do is make it so that right when she finishes saying this word stay, I'm gonna put a point right on it, right here. And then I'm gonna put another point when she finishes that word. And we're gonna go ahead and put another point right about there. And I'm gonna pull this up, just like this. And this might be a little bit too aggressive, but here's how it sounds now.
Don't tell me that you really wanna stay when I'm the one.
So you can hear that when she says stay, that reverb goes up and it gives you this sense and this feeling that the reverb is actually breathing with the vocal. So if we were to really want to exaggerate it even more, just in case you didn't really capture or hear how that sounds, here's what it sounds like, really exaggerating it.
Don't tell me that you really wanna stay when I'm the one.
And that actually sounds pretty good. You might not want to push it that hard, but that's definitely an option. So by actually automating your reverbs, you can give it so much more life. You can do these creative decisions where we suck everything in and go super dry. Or beyond that, you can take the phrases where you have space between phrases and push your reverb up so it actually breathes along with the track. And that right there, my friends, is a fantastic technique to be using in your productions. That brings us to tip number 5. If you want a more unique sounding vocal with reverb, then you're gonna wanna do this. And that is to use 2 reverbs on 2 separate buses. Now, one is gonna be a longer reverb, which is the one that is gonna be more quote unquote heard. And the second is a shorter reverb. And this one is essentially to add perceived width. Let me show you. So we're gonna go ahead and take a look at the same example that we've been looking at. We're just gonna take a look at this verse here. So far what we have is we have this longer reverb that we've been playing with for the majority of this video. It's a reverb that you can very clearly hear. It's adding a nice bit of space and it sounds fantastic. But this trick is basically to add a second reverb. So what we're gonna do is go in here and you can see that we already have this bus for long Vox reverb. So we're gonna go bus 11, send 100% of it. And we're gonna call this short Vox reverb. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab a reverb that is going to be a smaller reverb. Typically, we're gonna go for more of a room reverb. So for this, I'm just gonna use Reverb. It's a stock plugin that's built directly into Logic. And I'm gonna set this to maybe like not even a second length. So the decay you can see here is at 0.8 seconds. And we're gonna set this to 100% wet. And now let's go ahead and listen to how this sounds, just the reverb.
I changed my mind.
So obviously that sounds really weird, right? Because it's just in a room, it sounds very hollow, interesting like that. But as we actually take this and blend it in, so here's basically what's gonna happen. I'm gonna play this, I'm gonna start turning the fader up on the short reverb, and what you're gonna notice is that it's gonna give you this sense of perceived width. Now, if you're not wearing headphones or using monitors, you're not gonna be able to get the full extent of this, so make sure you're doing that. So here's what it actually sounds like now.
I changed my mind to realign. You think you stand a chance when...
That's about as far as I want to push it, okay? So here's without it, okay? I'm gonna mute it, and I'm gonna unmute it so you can really hear this.
I changed
Without.
my mind
And here's with.
to realign. You think you stand a chance when...
All right, tip number 6 is that if you are a home studio producer and you need help leveling up your entire process of producing a song from start to finish, then you need to watch my free workshop where I cover the exact process I use called the production roadmap. It's absolutely jam-packed with tons of value that you won't find all in one place anywhere else on my channel. I have a link right here for you to check out and it's in the description as well. I'll see you inside that workshop.